Yeah, is this coming through okay? Can you hear us? Can you hear this through your computer? There's a delay, is there? Yeah.
Okay.
Try again. Well, yeah, yep. Yes, I think that's on, isn't it? Yes. So have we got to start from the very top again? No, just
the
councillors
councillors
the county.
yes.
So if you, we're working. Okay, we're back on air. So that's good. So, Mr. Taylor, I'm sorry about the interruption there. So, if you would like to resume, because the committee heard everything you were saying, so that's that's crucial.
That's fine.
Okay, so over to you again.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Apologies for that. Right, I believe I was at bullet point D of the late reps, the 14 letter rejection, which was that the amount of carbon emission. So colleagues in the environment team have advised that because of the building's construction materials it's built from, the fact that it is two buildings that at some point in its history have become co-joined, there will need to be a significant amount of materials put into that building to make it habitable. It's the majority of the building has never been used for habitable purposes. I believe it was originally built as a factory at some point in the Victorian era and has a number of uses throughout its history. Would not make the demolition and the erection of a new build with materials up to modern standards, modern heating methods, etc. A significant difference in terms of the carbon emissions generated through demolishing the building. Similarly, the architect has clarified that they did look at a number of options for the building, including working with it, and similarly discounted it because of the amount of additional materials. And one of the factors they do consider is embodied versus operational carbon in the building. So it is, whilst it's not a technical requirement through the planning submission process, it is something that they have looked at and considered as part of their application considerations. Bullet point E within the late representations is concerns about capacity at the local primary school. Members advised that it falls, the quantum of development falls below the threshold for attracting Section 106 requests and contributions, but the Education Authority do have a legal obligation to provide educational needs for all those eligible within the borough. Similarly, the next bullet point was concerns about pressure on existing services such as doctors, dentists, etc. Again, the CCG will be aware of housing targets within the borough and will have to forecast and account for that as part of that process. Bullet point G is to do with air pollution. I have checked with colleagues in environmental health team, apologies, get my teeth in, who've clarified that the site itself sits outside of the air quality management area. The site is also a relatively small scale proposal from their criteria, and that the levels of nitrogen dioxide in the air quality management area have fallen below the target set for that area within the last few years, and therefore they would see no justification for asking for an air quality assessment for this site as part of the application process. So in short, your environmental health officers do not agree that air quality would be an issue on this site. Through my papers. Bullet points H through O address issues of the design, parking, level of development, privacy, highway safety, traffic congestion, noise and privacy. Officers are content that those matters are covered within the main agenda papers. Nevertheless, there are some short bullet points advising that they're either covered in the report or covered through the report and conditions. The only other update on the application, Chairman, is a couple of typographical errors on my part, for which I apologise. Paragraph 13 refers to a floor risk assessment. Clearly, this should be a flood risk assessment. Paragraphs 31, 38, 42 and 43 refer to Oakfield, singular, whereas the road name is actually Oakfields, plural road. So apologies on my behalf for those oversights. Right, that's your late reps. In terms of the application. Right, the application seeks full permission for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site, the erection of 9 two-storey apartments with associated works including landscaping and access including underground car parking. The site is not within the conservation area, however it does sit within flood zone 3, but it's within an area of flood zone 3 that benefits from flood defences. The site comprises a large 2-storey building that has been previously extended and is located between Rutland Road to the south and Oakfields Road to the north, and is surrounded by a mixture of mainly terrace and semi-detached housing, as well as some more recently built apartments to the site's immediate east. The site is occupied by what appears to be a 2-storey building that has been last used as a children's daycare nursery. However, the main element of the building that runs north-south within the red line there has a basement beneath it and has a loft area too. And attached to the western side of this element, towards the bottom corner of the red line, is what appears to be a 2-storey house that I mentioned has become co-joined to the building at some point in its past. That building has a basement beneath it as well, and 3 floors of accommodation above. That element primarily fronts onto Rutland Road. The buildings fill the width of the plot and have limited outside space to the east and west of the dominant element. The application proposes demolishing the buildings on the site and erecting new residential development of 9 terrace properties broadly centrally within the plot. Underground parking is proposed with access along the western side of the building from Oakfields Road. The new building would be of a lower height and smaller mass than the structure it seeks to replace. And it should be noted that for planning purposes, officers have considered the proposal as dwellings and not apartments, as they are 2-storey units of accommodation with their own separate front doors, and except for the garage beneath and the proposed small communal area, they have no shared or common facilities. The proposed building is of a contemporary design which differs from the predominantly Edwardian and Victorian nature of its surroundings. Design is a subjective matter, members. However, you are reminded that just because something differs from its surroundings, it does not mean that it is automatically harmful or should be refused. Areas do evolve, and buildings also need to be designed to address the constraints of their surroundings. As set out in the report, the assessment of the relationships to the neighbouring uses and the character of the area have been undertaken. Officers have concluded that when assessing the proposal against paragraph 130 of the NPPF and the policies identified within the development plan, the proposal does make an efficient use of the site whilst providing an appropriate amount of parking and open space. Whilst the design differs from that of its surroundings, the design is a direct response to the challenging nature of developing this site. The site constraints include its location within flood zone 3, its shape, its size, and its proximity to neighbouring uses. Members will be aware that sites within flood zones often require raised ground floors levels, and that's no different with this particular application. However, the building addresses those issues whilst retaining a lower overall height and mass than the building it seeks to replace. The site has 2 frontages and therefore is not deep enough to provide the necessary parking, living, accommodation and amenity space whilst retaining 2 active frontages and making an efficient use of the site. The architect advises that options for a typical block type apartments and traditional vernacular housing were discounted due to the impacts of them generating the need to solely rely on on-street parking in an area where this is already prevalent and creates no doubt frustrations and nuisance to existing residents. The proximity of neighbouring developments, access to natural light and the locations of windows and outside spaces have also led the applicants to positioning the building as centrally as possible and designing window orientations to minimise the potential for overlooking whilst maintaining a cohesive design and appearance of the building. Similarly, the use of balcony screens and assessment of the angles and distances from neighbouring properties and their outside areas have shaped and formed a design of the proposal that is before you for consideration. To be clear, it's not the applicant's desire to simply build something that looks different, but the product of the design-led solution that seeks to address the relationships and the constraints of the site. Therefore, when balancing the requirements to make an efficient use of this brownfield site and other identified constraints, officers have concluded that the design and the resultant relationships are an acceptable response to the proposed building. The initial concerns raised by technical consultees have been addressed through revisions, and the correspondence was received are set out in the agenda papers. Members should note that whilst none of the technical consultees, including the Environment Agency, the Emergency Planner, Lead Local Flood Authority and Highway Authority are objecting to the proposal, the ward members and residents are. Their comments are summarised in the report and the late reps and can be read in full on the website. So I'll now take members on a guided tour via the medium of photographs around the site. So we have the red line with Oakfields Road to the north, Rutland Road to the south. Site plan showing the outline of the building that's currently on the site. This is a view along Rutland Road, just above where the white car is in the road in the centre of that image. You may be able to see depending on how good your eyesight is, a circular disc on the left-hand side. That's the advertisement advertising the former nursery building. And as we move a little bit closer to it, you can see it to the left-hand side of the pollarded tree that is growing back with the light-coloured leaves on it. You see Oakfields Road heading off to the sort of the left-hand side in the centre of that image as well. So this is the Rutland Road frontage. So you'll see it's predominantly in a residential area. And this is the frontage of the building that appears to have been, at some point, it's passed in a residential use, but has been absorbed and amalgamated into the historic uses of the site. Members will also note to the left-hand side of this image, you can clearly see that the property there has had a recent extension to its rear and has some windows at first ground floor level and some roof lights above it. Officers have looked at the plan for that extension, which was approved in 2017. And the windows that directly face towards that element of the site serve a utility cloakroom WC area at ground floor level and an ensuite bathroom level at first floor level. And then within the loft space area, again, there is a bathroom area there with a roof light above it. So they are not habitable rooms that would be facing the site at its closest point. This is just looking back towards the property. You can see the scale of it in comparison to the predominantly residential use of the street on Rutland Road. And then moving back past the site and turning left, so turning right, we turn into Oakfields Road. And again, you start to see the silhouette, the outline of the building that is on site at the moment. So this is the former nursery building that has been subject to a number of extensions in its past. This is the primary frontage, if you like. This is where the children were picked up and dropped off from. And again, you see an area of car parking to the right-hand side, which I believe was predominantly for staff. And there is an area to the right, so to the left-hand side, that was sort of an outside play area as well. Again, on the left-hand edge of this image, you'll see that there's been some more recent apartment buildings constructed that were granted permission in 1997 and built in 1999. You'll notice they've got a number of high-level windows on their rear elevation facing towards the site. Again, this is looking down towards that development at the end of the road. And this is the side elevation where the play area for the nursery use was. Officers, again, have looked at the internal configurations for those apartments. They're the buildings at the bottom edge of this image. And again, looking a bit closer, they appear to have hallways and bathrooms with the windows facing towards the site with sort of high-level windows. So again, not habitable rooms that would be in closest proximity to the application site. So this is the building that's on the site at the moment, and its annotated distances, which I appreciate are not the clearest thing because of the resolution on this screen, but they give an indication of where the building is and how close some of the buildings are, both to the immediate east and west. And this shows the internal configuration of the dominant element of the building with its basement, ground, first and second floor accommodation. And again, some elevations, because I appreciate it's not always easiest to get close alongside because of its position between existing residential developments. And again, the elevations that I've shown you in the photographs. So this is the building that's there at the moment. This is the built form that the applicants are asking for your consideration and determination of this afternoon. So you'll note, as I sort of notionally go back and forth, that it becomes a more slender building, more centrally located within the plot. And as you come down Beaver Road to the immediate north, that's where the access to the proposed underground car parking is proposed to be. So this shows the access ramp down and the 13 underground car parking spaces that are proposed. First floor accommodation, or ground floor accommodation as it would be, first floor accommodation within the proposed apartments. You'll note that due to the shapes of the building, they are angled so that the windows are orientated sort of northeast and northwest to minimise the relationships to the neighbouring residential developments that exist alongside the site. And by bringing the building in away from the boundaries, it gives a little bit of separation to those areas. and a roof plan showing that they are predominantly flat roof buildings to allow some roof lights to go within the roof structure to allow some lights into those rooms, again, to minimise the need for additional openings on the sideward facing elevations. Again, some more internal configurations to show that 8 of the buildings or 8 of the proposed dwellings would be two bedroom, but the one at the southern edge would be a 3-bedroom property. And the proposed elevations. Now, I appreciate it in 2D format, they can be quite difficult to interpret. I will come on to some images shortly where the architects have kindly provided some 3D illustrative images of what the building would look like. Difficult to get an element of sort of scale of depth and judge the relationships. The red dotted outline on these images show you the outline of the existing buildings that currently occupy the site. So you can see that it's been reduced in height and width and mass when compared to the existing structure that's there at the moment. The top image is the view from Oakfields Road. The bottom image is the view from Rutland Road. And again, we have a number of sections through the site showing the proposed relationships to the existing neighbouring residential uses that flank the site to its east and west. So these are the images produced by the architect. So this is the same view where we started with our photographs looking along Rutland Road with the site on your left-hand side. You'll note that the proposal includes a gable end feature, which mimics a feature that is fairly common and prevalent within the street scene. And again, moving just past the site, again, you see the proposed elevational treatment and its relationship to the neighbouring properties. This is the view along Oakfields Road. I don't quite know how they've done it, but the architects have managed to generate this image that jumps back and forth between what is currently on the site and what they are asking members to consider this afternoon. So again, it gives you an indication of the changes in scale, height and mass compared to what's there at the moment. And again, moving slightly further along Oakfields Road, we get the view looking down Beaver Road towards the site with the access to the underground car park visible within this rendering. Final image is from within the site showing the proposed front doors for access to the individual dwellings as we have considered them. So members, the application is seeking full planning permission for the redevelopment of a challenging brownfield site in a predominantly residential area of the borough. None of the technical consultees are objecting to the proposal, and notably the Highway Authority do not object to the access arrangements, and the Environment Agency, Emergency Planner and Lead Local Flood Authority are not objecting, despite the site's location within Flood Zone 3. The contemporary design is a direct response to the site's constraints, and whilst the site is surrounded by development built in and around the early 1900s, there are examples of more recent development in the immediate area. Officers are satisfied that the proposal is in accordance with the policies in the local plan, and subject to the conditions set out in the report, are recommending approval on that basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. That was very clear when we got the sound back, so thank you for that. Right, we have 2 speakers for this. The first speaker is a neighbour or a resident, but they are not with us today, but they have sent what they were, if they've sent in what they would have said if they were here. So Mrs. Sells will read it out on behalf of the resident who has asked her or asked for their comments to be made. So Mrs. Sells, please.
Thank you, Chair. The resident writes, to the committee, I would like to object to the character, size and impact of the proposed development for several reasons. The buildings are totally out of character with the rest of the road on Oakfields Road and the majority of buildings on Rutland Road. Previous developments on Oakfields Road, including the property I live in on Baytree Court, which was built in 1999, were built in a sympathetic style and scale to the buildings on the rest of the road. This even went down to including a stipulation for wooden windows and doors in a late Victorian, early Edwardian style. I do not believe that the buildings proposed for the former Wishing Well Nursery take into account previous planning stipulations on that earlier development. The entrance to the new flats will be on Oakfields Road, opposite Beaver Road. This road is narrow, even with the home zone bays, and on school run, match day and bin day, it is an issue exiting even the existing properties. I'm not opposed to affordable new homes being built. I'm not a NIMBY, but the new proposed homes have fewer parking bays than bedrooms. This will exacerbate the parking issues already present on Oakfields Road, which means that allocated parking bays for residents at Baytree Court, which was built with 1 parking space per bedroom, again, as I understand the planning stipulation, are already used by commuters, homeowners from other parts of Lady Bay and football match attendees. I am not opposed to homes being built on this site, but the scale of the development is not in keeping with the rest of the development over more than a century on Oakfields Road, nor is it in keeping with the character of the street. I believe that family homes which are affordable are more needed than the proposed properties. I would ask if a conversion back to a family property on Rutland Road has been thought about, and a possible demolition of the more industrial property and more sympathetic development for Oakfields Road has been thought about. I'm also concerned that the loss of a nursery building is a local of a community asset, which is as needed as new homes in the area, especially with the proposed relocation of Lady Bays Primary School in the near future. I would request that the Planning Committee ask for a site visit before making a decision, as the officer's recommendations do not seem to take account of the reality on the ground, rather than the glossy documents provided by the developer. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sells. And our other speaker on this is one of the ward members, so Councillor Richard Mallender. So as soon as you're ready, we're all ears.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, everyone. Yes, I think it's something that all the residents have said. It's a real shame that the Wishing Well Nursery closed in the end. It was popular, it's well loved, it was open for many years, and I think hundreds, probably thousands of children had sort of very memorable times there as kids. I think the problem is, as other people have said, it's not that there's an objection to new housing in the area. I think it's to the size and scale, and particularly the look of the building. I think the main thing is that many people feel that it's, the proposal is out of keeping with the area. I think perhaps apart from a few nostalgic takes, there is not a great deal of love for the existing building as a building. It's not the nicest looking thing in the world. It's covered with an asbestos roof. That's going to be fun for whoever comes to demolish. I was quite glad to see that permission came up just to talk about the demolition, because there's been issues with that, not just in Lady Bay, but around the borough, as we know. But I think there is concern that what is proposed is out of keeping the area. It is predominantly Victorian housing. It does front onto Rutland Road to the south, and to the north you have the Oakfields area. The area immediately to the right, as you look at the picture there, what is the Oakfields area, that was a very relatively recent development that was put in there. That is mainly social housing. So those are maisonettes. It's very, very sympathetic to the area. It works well. It fits in. It was a laundry at one point. It's a shame that that area did not have the opportunity to be used to extend the school at the time, which would have probably got around a lot of other problems with schools expanding in tight-knit urban areas. There is concern, which I know has been mentioned by the County Council constituencies, over traffic movements in the area. Beaver Road immediately to the north, and Oakfields running across the top of the site there. It is quite constrained. There are a number of build-outs and planters there that local people care for. But of course, it's not just the number of cars that's increased. We also have more traffic parking in Lady Bay, particularly when there are matches on. Predominantly Forest, but others as well at Trent Bridge. And the size of cars. As we all know, cars have gone on a big sort of expansion of their waistlines, as it were, to the point where the only way to sell a small car these days is to advertise it as a mini SUV. That means that we have a lot more cars that are forced to park on street. The existing parking bays are no longer adequate for them. I would request that the officers check the size of the parking bays. There's no point having 13 bays if people can't get their cars into them, and the turning spaces inside the site that would result from that. I think I was right in seeing that there was a cycle bay in the Undercroft, so I welcome that. In fact, I do welcome the idea of the Undercroft parking in general. Because of the parking on streets, that is to be welcomed. But as I say, it must be something that can cater for the size of vehicles that have now. Otherwise, people will end up parking on the street. And there is consideration as well, or concern rather, that people will have more than one car, and there will be further pressure on parking in the area. As well as that issue, we've also had the fact that the regularity of the 11 bus service, which serves Lady Bay very, very well, has dropped from every 12 minutes to every 15 minutes, and now during the day is every 20 minutes interval. We're hoping that will come back, but there's no guarantee of that, of course, at the moment. Really, I should say in conclusion that I do have a look at the plans. I do feel that it is out of character with the area. Most of it is Victorian, as I say. There have been other sort of more modern developments built in Lady Bay in recent years, but they are just dotted around here and there. And whereas here, you'll be actually looking at something that forms otherwise a contiguous Victorian street scene. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mallender. Well within time. So do you want to come back on any of those points, in particular the comment from the residents about, well, actually also Councillor Mallender about the size, scale, appearance. They think it's out of character. There's regret about the loss of the nursery, but plainly we can't really get involved with that. It is what it is. And comments about the underground car parking, and do we know the bay sizes for cars, and are they too big, etc. I think those are the main points. You can come back up, please.
Thank you, Chair. As members will have seen from the illustrative images, the building that is there, as Councillor Mallender says, is probably not going to win any design awards. That said, there are no two ways of hiding it. What is proposed is very different to its surroundings. But as you will have seen, it is a smaller building in terms of its height, its width and its mass. So whilst I accept that character-wise it is very different to what surrounds it, I don't necessarily agree that in terms of its size and mass that it is larger than what is currently on the site. In terms of the Bay Tree Court development, which is the modern development to the right-hand side of that image, that was approved, as I say, in 1997, built in 1999. That is under a previous policy position, a previous local plan that would have been considered at the time. So things have changed in the past 2 decades in terms of the planning policy position. In terms of the loss of the building, you're right, Chairman, that was a commercial decision. The nursery ceased trading Christmas last year, so it's been closed for nearly 12 months. Within the report, I do sort of set out that assessment and whether we needed to go through the assessment of loss of a community asset. The long and the short of it is it had ceased trading before the application came in, and a long time before the application came in. I appreciate it would have been a valued asset to the wider community. A number of people would have been there, happy memories, but it was gone before the application came in. In terms of the size of bays within the underground parking area, again, the architects have been sort of clear in their response to me that when they were looking at the possibility of converting the building, the fundamental headache, given the size of the building, if they were to convert all of it, there wouldn't be enough land available on the site to generate any outside amenity space and or parking area. So there would always have to be an element of demolition on this site if that was an option they were going to explore. To make adequate provision, let's say it would have required some demolition of the building, and would still have adversely affected the street scene by adding on-street parking to the area, which is something they've worked quite hard to avoid where possible. They do say that they have pushed the underground car parking option, which is not a cheap option, with the applicant, because they see the wider benefits, not only to the wider community, but also to being able to provide other things on site, like some outside space and other things that will allow the development to be a nicer place to live. In terms of the parking bay sizes underneath, it's been assessed by the County Council against their new design standards. They've not raised any objections or any concerns with regards to bay sizes, number of bays proposed. They have asked for tracking to show that it is possible to get a vehicle in and out of them without having to do a huge shunting manoeuvre to do so. And Councillor Mallender is correct, there is a cycle store showed within the underground parking area as well. But I think that's covered the points, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think it has. Highways, normally we say that highways rarely object to any applications, but they did initially raise concerns about this, and mainly to do with the visibility, and which has been addressed. So it wasn't a uniform sort of response that one might imagine we get. Right. So interesting application this, and as you explained in in the report, the application refers to apartments, but in reality they are dwellings. We are referring to them as dwellings. Because I think when you start thinking about apartments, you initially think of the big block, for example, don't you? But now we've seen the plans, it's very clear as to what is being proposed. So, any comments, Councillor Upton?
They're mainly comments, Chairman, rather than questions, and there are a variety. And I apologise if I repeat what the planning officer said to some degree, but personally, I think the existing building is out of character with its local area, and it's probably come to the end of its life. And any talk about converting it to whatever use, I think probably, given the description of it with asbestos cement roof sheeting and its configuration, is probably not financially viable. So in my perspective, anything that replaces it will be an improvement to the local area and the street scheme. Now the question comes then, well, the proposed replacement of it, and mention has been made that one of the key issues is about the design. And design, to me, having worked in the industry all my working life, is very subjective. What you like, I may not, and what I like, you probably won't like. And it changes over time. And that's the nature of architectural design. Building styles and building designs do change over the generations. And as I think you mentioned, it's 2 decades ago since Bay Tree Court design was put on the table and approved. You know, a lot happens in 2 decades, and particularly in building design and costs and changing technology in the construction industry. So I'll park trying to go back and mirror image the Victorian, Edwardian, or even the 1990s ages. I think I'm looking at it from its what is proposed in itself, and to me it comes in as a smaller, significantly smaller size and scale to what's there at the moment. So that's a plus for me. It's a brownfield site, and for a number of reasons, I think you know, the viability issues and the styles, I'm minded to support it, because I don't come from the school that says one has to build everything new that is a mirror image of what's already there in the street. If it's done well, then it can fit in quite nicely. I think the debate today is the subjective. Do people like the proposed design or do they not? And that's very subjective. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Points noted. Probably no need to come back on that, but very clear what you were saying. Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just questions really. Flood risk 3, I understand, is the highest risk. And Paul, you have said that the area it benefits from are flood defences. But reading my notes, the Environment Agency initially raised a holding objection, whatever that means. And as a result of that, there was an updated flood risk. Now, perhaps you might inform us what was the query, and has the answer mitigated the problem, whatever it was? My second point, really, if you just bear with me, is the car parking. And somewhere again in the notes, there was a reference to floating vehicles. And I'm not quite sure how clearly the entrance to the car parking is a gradient. There'll be a natural runoff of rainwater. Is that going to end up in the basement, or is it going to be channeled as it comes down that gradient? But I certainly wouldn't want to be one of the residents who go down in the morning and make sure I took my wellies and my sub is floating. I'm sure that's extreme, but it's just a thought, really. But if there's also reference to a sump and a pump, and clearly there is a danger that the basement will flood or will hold rain. But where is that going to go? Is it going to be pumped back up to the ground level, or is there going to be an outlet somewhere in the car parking space itself? I endorse Councillor Upton's remarks about the building. I mean, I went and had a look at it this morning, and yeah, quite clearly, it's not convertible by any standards, by any means. And I think anything that replaces it would add to the site and the area and the street, perhaps. One query just on the building itself, and I'm sure I may be wrong, but the colour is rather light. Is that the proposed colour of the building, or do we have any information on that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. So yes, flood risk, pumps, floating vehicles, the car parking, and the design colour in particular.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, in terms of the holding objection, they're not uncommon. It's a position whereby the Environment Agency is seeking clarity or additional information before they express a view one way or another, saying we either support it or we object. So the position that they initially had was they were requiring additional information to clarify something that was perhaps assumed but not explicitly stated. So there was clarification provided. It was to do with very technical matters. I won't profess to be able to recall them off the top of my head, but the full extent of the comments are available on the website in terms of their response. Ultimately, the position was the Environment Agency were satisfied with that clarification, with that revision, with that update, and have arrived at a position whereby, subject to the conditions within the reports, they are satisfied that planning permission could be granted for the site in terms of its flood risks. In terms of the car parking, you are correct. It is underground by the very nature of gravity. In times of heavy rain, water will only go in one direction. There are conditions set out within the report. There is a condition 17, which is details of a surface water drainage scheme. So whilst I don't know the answer to your question, I strongly suspect that there would be some sort of flood channels and things like that to prevent it running down into that garage area and the levels rising. But you are correct, in times of extreme flooding, as part of the flood risk assessment, there is that potential for that basement to become not necessarily submerged, but to fill up with water. And there are some very, very specific conditions which I've not had to deal with before in the 20 years I've been doing this job, about the design of the roof. So if there were an extreme flood event, cars were to be floating around there, that the building's designed to accommodate the impacts of vehicles doing such things. There's also very specific requirements within the flood risk assessment and the evacuation plan to make sure that residents are prevented from putting themselves and or others at risk by trying to go down there. In terms of the materials, clearly they are an indication of the applicant's, the architect's preference, but you'll note again within the suggested conditions there is a specific requirement for samples of materials. Clearly it would appear to be a brick finish with sort of a metal roofing, but in terms of the colours and things like that, they are not set in tablets of stone at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, but those details will come back as part of the conditions, so that's, people should be rest assured on that. Councillor Thomas, please. Oh, sorry, I missed you. I'm sorry, I didn't see you indicate. So Councillor Price, then Councillor Thomas.
Sorry, I had kind of three major areas of concern, one of which we've addressed, which is parking and the flooding risk around parking, because I know that this is an area which does get damp basements. The other issue that I kind of just wanted a bit of clarification on is the availability of outside space, because the outside space allocation is below what's recommended, and I just wanted some clarification on why that's considered acceptable. And potential overlooking. I mean, I know the design of the building has been done to minimise that, but obviously that's something that residents have raised lots of objections to, so I could just do with some reassurance on what's been done to mitigate that.
Thank you. So with regards to the overlooking, well, Mr. Taylor will come in on this, but I think we should take some heart from the plans we saw, because the window angle is quite unusual, isn't it? It's been deliberately designed to not overlook. But so I'm stealing your thunder there, aren't I? And then the other query about outside space, and can you help us with that, please? I know there is some, but maybe there might be other alternatives.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Ultimately, planning is always a balance. It's like a lot of things in time. If you're house hunting and you've got a budget of £1 million, there will still be an element of compromise in terms of trying to find your dream property. Planning is often the same. There's no two ways about it, it's a challenging site to develop. The applicants have sought to, their application description is as apartments, and there is a lesser requirement for amenity space for apartments. For technical reasons, officers have treated it as a dwelling, as a house. And you're quite right, there is guidance within the residential design guide, and it is an aging document. I've got a copy of it here to refresh myself with what it says, and it refers to previously established guidelines. So not only is the current guidance of an age now, it is referring to previous guidance that talks about the size of garden areas that you would encourage for developments. And it talks about 90 square metres for semi-detached and terrace properties, 55 square metres for 1 and 2 bed properties. Now, what this guidance has never done is reconciled what you do if you've got a 1-bedroomed terrace property. Which standard do you apply? Arguably, you would probably apply the lesser standard. Each property does have a balcony area, and they are below that standard. They're in the region of, I did measure them earlier, I think they're sort of 12 square metres, so they are well below that standard. There is also an area of communal outside space available to all residents should the development go ahead. What the guidance goes on to say is, if you are unable to fulfil these size requirements, there are certain exceptions that may justify an under provision or a lesser standard. And it talks about proximity to open space or accessible countryside. This site is a short walk from the Hook, would be my response to that. It's also a short walk from the Sir Julian Calm Pavilion. So there is public open space that can be utilised in the area. It also talks about looking at the nature of what is in the immediate area. And again, you'll see there are a number of properties on the image up there that, again, built well before this standard was in place, but do appear to have relatively small gardens, primarily due to the shape and the orientation of the plots in which they are built. And the other thing is, we have to balance against that, making an efficient use of the land. Bringing forward a brownfield site, it is highly unlikely in viability terms that you would ever get a single property built on that site, just because of the costs of clearing the site and remediating it and making it suitable for accommodation. So officers do acknowledge that, yes, it is below the standards. Given the balancing exercise we've been through, we are happy that the applicants are proposing some amenity space, and we think that is preferable to providing none and potentially having slightly larger internal spaces within the dwellings as proposed. In terms of privacy, again, as Councillor Butler hasn't stolen my thunder, has clarified points in terms of the orientations of those buildings. Again, there is a slide, if I can just skim back to show it. Again, on this, the architects have sought to demonstrate that not only from within the building, but also from the outside small patio areas, the relationships and the use of boundary treatments to prevent, minimise any unneighbourly relations in terms of the distances and the angles afforded to people in those outside areas towards neighbouring properties. And again, I would remind members that within a fairly tight-knit urban area like this, it is not uncommon for your neighbour to be able to view some of your garden and vice versa. So again, as part of that balancing exercise, officers are satisfied, given the immediate neighbouring uses and the proposed use of boundary treatments, that the privacy level will be of an acceptable standard.
I hope that's some help, Councillor Price. Okay. Now, Councillor Thomas, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I've got several issues really to raise. As far as the basement parking is concerned, I've been reading the documentation, and as you say, they're proposing to strengthen the walls underneath, because the cars will, they're expecting, if it floods, that the cars will float and they'll float around and bump into the walls. Residents will be presented with a flood evacuation plan, and they're also talking about, as well as the pump, they're also talking about excluding access into the garage if the area is flooded. I'm pleased to see that there are electric charging points conditioned, but I'm just thinking about all these cars plugged into the electricity floating around underneath the building. It is quite unusual, I think, to see this in a development. I've not seen anything quite this specific. And while I appreciate the the need and the desirability of putting the car parking underneath, I think there are issues there really to think about, I think. But I, I'll obviously welcome any further comments on that. The other thing is that if I was living there, I would probably, if there was any chance at all of flooding, given the measures that are being proposed, I know what I'd do. I'd park on the street. So I think there will be times when the street parking problem, which has already been identified as a concern, will be exacerbated, really. The other thing about the design in terms of flooding is that it is raised from the ground, so the entrance level for the properties will be raised. I think in terms of the street scene, that does impact on the street scene to have, we've talked about the design of the buildings and whether they blend in, but the fact and the height and so on, but the fact that they will be a higher level at the ground floor, I think is significant in terms of the street scene, and that hasn't been covered off. So I think it's that is out of character as well. I agree with what everybody else is saying about the building, and it is subjective. Design is subjective. There are some attempts to key in the design, I think, to the street that have been articulated by the developer. But I think probably more could have been done to do that. And I think the face onto Oldfield Road is not very appealing at all. That one, that is not a face that onto a street, if you know what I mean. That looks like the back of a building, but it is facing onto a street. So I'm concerned about that, really. There is a condition about removing the asbestos, but it's on the basis of, if we find any asbestos, whereas it's already been covered that there's a huge asbestos roof here. So I'm wondering if that needs to be strengthened, given the proximity to other properties. Permitted development rights have been removed, I think, but perhaps you could just go through that as well. I just don't see anything about solar panels or any other energy efficiency type measures. The other thing that I've noticed is that there are 2 bedrooms upstairs in these flats, but dwellings, but no bathroom, and I think that limits the sorts of people that could live in them, really. So I think we're talking about probably not families, probably young professional people, given the likely price point, which again tends to imply 2 cars because there's 2 largest equal-sized bedrooms upstairs. So I'd ask about that. I've also noted, as Councillor Price did, the outside amenity space. So I think there's a question as to whether or not it's intensive for the plot, and that has been raised. But on the other hand, there is the point about maximising density and so on. And I think that was all I noted. Yeah, just generally on parking, is there enough parking? There are not 2 parking spaces. There's not 1 parking space per bedroom. There are not 2 parking spaces per dwelling. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's quite a lot there, actually. So have you got to do all? Yes. Councillor Thomas made an interesting point about the electric in the basement. So anyway, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always gratifying knowing how much effort goes into writing these things to be reassured that members have read the report. So not casting no dispersions, but it's incredibly gratifying to see here and realise that questions have been quite rightly raised by it. So from my personal perspective, thank you for that. In terms of the basement parking and the flood evacuation plan, quite rightly, the Environment Agency plan for the worst case scenario, and that's particularly pertinent with new build buildings. As I understand it, if we were looking at a conversion, there are certain discrepancies or certain allowances for fabrics of existing buildings that may require less work. So you're quite right that they have planned for the worst case scenario of an extreme flood event, a breach of that nature, and the area being deluged by water, and with electric vehicles being plugged in and used there, you're quite right, they will be tethered, but they will float around. I have had this issue raised on others, like not in terms of the EVs, but in terms of what happens with substations in times of flood. And the short answer is they go pop. The power goes off. They are designed a bit like the fuse board in your house. The power goes off for the entire area. Rightly or wrongly, that is the position that electric things get wet, the power goes off. That's how their safety systems are designed. In terms of the raised street scene, in terms of the raised levels, you're right, those levels are raised in relation to the neighbouring properties. That would be true regardless of the type of residential form we were looking at on this site. They would still have an obligation to design their development to fulfil the difficulty of being within flood zone 3, and raising that floor area is the way that is achievable in this particular location. Obviously, things built at the turn of the last century weren't. There were no such standards, there was no such requirements. So something on this site will always be different in terms of its ground floor level. And I appreciate we're asking members to look at a fairly different, arguably challenging design compared to what's there at the moment. But even if it was a more traditional vernacular house, it would still have a raised ground floor level, as we've seen on other developments elsewhere within proximity to the River Trent. I've noted down, in terms of this elevation, something my grandmother would say, which is a face only a mother could love. I don't dispute it is a challenging design. It is very different to what's there. As I said within my initial appraisal, this is not a vanity product led by the applicant saying we want something that's going to be on Grand Designs, we want a TV show behind this. It is a design-led approach to the constraints of the site, and that is ultimately what has led to what is being asked to be considered by the members today. We've all said it, design is subjective. It's for members to determine the application based on what's before you. In terms of permitted development rights, you are correct. I will take you through that now, and that's one of the reasons when assessing it, I didn't necessarily agree that these are apartments, primarily because there's no shared communal internal space. You don't walk into a lobby area where your post boxes are and then go off to your various front doors into your flats. They have their own bespoke front doors. And as a result, that gives us the opportunity to control and remove potential permitted development rights, which would allow people to otherwise do things that we might not wish them to, or may wish to have an element of control over. So they are covered through conditions, find them within my reports, 21 through 25. So condition 21 would require any applicant wishing to extend a property in any way, shape or form to apply for planning permission to do so. So again, we get to assess any changes in relationship, appearance, design, and also if they were going to potentially have more people living there, the impacts on flood risk. Class B, which is condition 2, again, allows us to control through the requirement to submit a planning application any alterations to the roof of a dwelling. So again, if the roof shape were to change, or if they want to modify it, put anything new in it, again, we have that element of control. Condition 23 is Class E, which is to do with structures within the curtilage of the dwellings, and this primarily relates to property. I'll go back to the plans. At the southern end of the site, which is benefits from not only being a 3-bed unit, whereas the others are all 2-bed, but it's got a smaller patio area, but it does have its own rear garden area. And again, in terms of adding structures to that, you potentially impact on the flood mitigation side of things, and potentially have an unneighbourly relationship to this property to the south, which you'll notice again has a relatively small triangular rear private garden. So again, it's to regulate, control, and have an element of understanding as to what people may want to do in terms of outside spaces. Condition G is to do with the insertion of chimneys, flues, soils and vent pipes. Again, that's more an amenity issue in terms of relationships and positions in relation to the neighbouring properties, recognising the proximity of them. And condition 25 is a relatively new provision within the general permitted development order, which would otherwise allow properties to add an additional story of accommodation going upwards. Not something I think we've yet seen significantly within Rushcliffe, but it's something we're very much mindful of in terms of having assessed the height, the mass, the scale of the buildings we're putting before members for consideration to do. If we weren't to remove that condition, arguably someone in the future could apply or not need to apply within certain allowances to extend their property upwards, very much changing its appearance and its relationships to its neighbours. So that's why condition 25 is in the recommendation pack. In terms of solar PV and other energy efficient methods, you're right, Councillor Thomas, there is nothing within the submission in relation to that. Again, I would like to see them there. They're not there. There is not a policy requirement within the local plan yet. We have to determine what's before us. In terms of bed and bathroom locations, so we have ground floor. So the 8 2-bed units are handed mirrored versions of each other. So the internal configuration is the same for the 4 on the left-hand side and a mirror image is the same for the 4 on the left. So you come in through a hallway, downstairs cupboard area. There is a lounge, kitchen, dining area and a downstairs WC. For the 3-bed unit, it is a larger lounge diner, but again, it has a downstairs WC area, entrance area, bit of storage, kitchen, dining area. First floor above, in the 2-bedroom units, you have 2 areas of residential, sorry, two bedrooms, but one of them has an ensuite. Within the 3-bed unit, you have 3 bedrooms, 2 of which have an ensuite. So I take your point that they may appeal to certain demographics more than the other, but in planning terms, they are still a dwelling. We still have to assess it on that basis. And going back to my notes, your final point with regards to the parking levels, 13 spaces are shown in the underground car park, and it's helpful that I'm on this image. There is 1 space shown, which would appear to be allied to the 3-bedroom unit, which currently exists actually on Rutland Road there. Again, I would advise that the Highway Authority have not objected on the parking levels proposed, and the application will have been assessed against their most recently adopted highway guidance.
Thank you. Do you want to come back, Councillor Thomas?
Yes, I couldn't see that one of the bedrooms did have an ensuite. There's a sort of dotted line, but that looks like some sort of option.
This is the first floor of the 2-bed unit, so you can see bedroom area numbered 10, the top left-hand corner here, and the area beneath it. My mouse is lagging. There's a ensuite bathroom area there.
It's a sort of dotted line, though. I think it looks as though it's something that they might put in and might not.
The internal configuration is something we would not have control over, and you're quite right, it could be something that was put in on day one and it could be removed in the future. Planning would have no control over that, I'm afraid.
Okay, and just one more thing that's occurred to me. Is there a condition about setting up some sort of management company for the communal space and so on? Thank you.
There is, Councillor Thomas, through your chair. It is covered in condition 4, which is quite a lengthy condition, which requires submission of details of hard and soft landscaping, details of proposed boundary treatments, including areas where boundary treatments are changed through the demolition of structures that may currently form those boundary treatments, and also requires details for proposed management responsibilities, maintenance schedules for the common or communal areas, and who is responsible for the removal, disposal of any arisings, clippings or waste generated by their maintenance. So that's covered through condition 4.
Cover the basement as well?
It doesn't. If members would like it to, that is something they can request should they wish to propose a recommendation.
Just say common communal areas, but I think it would probably be useful to include the basement specifically, given the fire evacuation and sump and the method of locking people out of the garage when it's raining, all that sort of stuff.
We can certainly clarify through condition 4 that this also includes not only the outside space but also the basement. In terms of the management maintenance responsibility for the sump and the evacuation, that is covered through a separate condition, Councillor Thomas. If you bear with me 2 seconds, it is covered through condition 16 through the requirement for a flood evacuation plan, which first bullet point, how the access and the cross will be closed off for residents. Safe route of exit, details of sump and pump to be installed, and who is responsible for the servicing, maintenance and management of this equipment.
Okay, thank you. Then Councillor Bailey, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a challenging design, but I think we've actually got to look and see what it could replace, because the existing building is not an attractive building that really is showing its signs of age. And it's really quite a commercial looking building in what really is a residential area, but mainly. So I think it's got that in its favour, in so much as it's challenging. But then, haven't we always thought something's challenging because it's different from what's there? So actually, if I'm absolutely honest, I quite like the design, given the area, that it's an urban area, and it will, I think, look a lot nicer. Whether it's your choice of style, but I think it'd look a great deal nicer than what's there at the moment. My one question, though, is flood risk level 3, which we're told it is. How often are we likely, flood level 3, how often are we likely to get a major flood rather than a minor inconvenient type flood? Thank you.
The requirement is to assess for what they term the 1 in 100 year event. So it's 1 in 100 years, and then there's also an additional uplifting requirement to account for climate change as well. So it's not, it is not an insignificant standard against which it has to be assessed. Now, that doesn't mean Mother Nature is Mother Nature. It doesn't mean that it knows it had an event 99 years ago, and therefore next year we are due another.
I mean, the other thing, of course, is there are flood alleviation measures already in Lady Bay, aren't there? Yeah. And I think the other thing is that Lady Bay is a known flood area that we've really got to work with. And I feel that we need housing. And so if we are going to replace what is on the plot at the moment, as long as we're mindful of the flood risk, I personally have no objection to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Probably not a lot to say about that. To come back on that, we understand the guidelines of the level 3, but you do want to say something.
Only to clarify, Councillor Bowler, anyone looking to buy a property in this area, their solicitor will flag it. Yes. It will be red light going. I would be shocked and dumbfounded if anyone bought a property and was not made aware, or claimed they were not made aware, that they were in a flood zone.
Right. Okay. Good. Councillor Upton, yes.
Well, just a quick point that Councillor Thomas, I think, mentioned about the removal of the asbestos cement roof sheeting. And I think, I can't remember the exact legislation, but there is the control of asbestos products. And that will be covered by that legislation, I think about 1968, 69, something. And the Health and Safety Executive would monitor and oversee that. So there shouldn't be any risk to the locality with the removal of asbestos cement roof sheeting.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. Yes, I'm sure you're correct. I mean, asbestos is a big issue, and everybody understands about the worries and dangers. Do you just want to clarify that?
Yeah, apologies, Councillor Thomas, I did miss that off your list of questions. It is covered through condition 13, which colleagues in environmental health have made conditional to their determination of the application, and it's prior to commencement of works, including any site clearance and demolition. An asbestos demolition survey shall be carried out, and then again, it's a fairly lengthy condition that refers them to the required standards.
Yeah, I think my point on that was, it says, you know, if we should happen to find any asbestos, and it doesn't quite reflect the fact that it's already known that there's quite a significant area of roof that has asbestos in it. So it was just the kind of general tenor of the thing, rather than anything else.
I think the wording's been used, Councillor Thomas, because I think you would be hard pressed not to notice the asbestos on the roof. There may be further asbestos in the building that may not be immediately apparent if buildings have been modified, partition walls put up and things like that. So I think that's why the wording is there. It's not for the, I hesitate to say it, the blindingly obvious. It's for the what lurks beneath.
Right, good. Okay, well, I think we've had quite a good discussion on this. It is as colleagues have said, it's challenging but also interesting application. This is in so many ways. I don't think there's anyone else desperate to speak on this. So is anyone ready to make some sort of move of a recommendation or otherwise? Councillor Upton, you were first spoken in, you was
yes, I don't mind making a proposal to support the recommendation of the officers, that is to give the approval.
Righty-ho, thank you. Would anyone like to second that proposal? Councillor Bailey. Okay, thank you. So we've got the recommendation moved by Councillor Upton and seconded by Councillor Bailey, and the solicitor wants to say something.
Sorry, could I just check? Councillor Thomas made reference to that amendment to condition 4 to make sure that the basement is covered on that wording about the common areas.
Oh, yes.
So just that you're both happy with that goes in,
Yes.
and that's the motion. Thank
Yes.
you.
So we've got that extra point noticed in the conditions. So, right, okay, so we'll make a decision on this then. So it's been a very interesting debate and discussion. So we've had the moved and seconded. Let's have a show of hands, please. All those in favour, please show. 9. Anyone against? 1 against. Okay. So that's noted, and so permission is granted with the amended conditions, and also the obviously we're all aware of the discussion we've had. So thank you for that. Right, the only other item on today's agenda is really just for noting. This is a report of recent appeal decisions. Really just for noting, unless anyone has got any observations or questions on them. This is quite a new idea. Well, it's not a new idea. We did it for a long time. Then for quite a while, we didn't have appeals on the planning committee. But as you can see, there are 4 reported here. 2 were allowed, 2 were dismissed. Do we want to say anything? Is there anything? They are what they are, aren't they? So unless anyone's got any questions or comments, no. Okay. So that's the final item on the agenda. So can I thank everybody for your attendance and your contributions, and the colleagues and officers. We'll close the meeting. It's 3:50, 10 to 4. So